The morning Sarah Chan walked in her laboratory at the Mars Research Station would be remembered as the last day of peace in the galaxy. She didn't know it yet, of course. How could she? The coffee maker was broken again, her assistant had called in sick with Martian flu, and the atmosphere processors were making that annoying humming sound that meant another maintenance request would disappear into the bureaucratic void. Sarah was a xenobiologist, one of the few humans who had dedicated their lives to studying alien life forms. At 32, she had already made groundbreaking discoveries about the crystalline organisms found in Europa's subsurface oceans and the silicon-based microbes that somehow thrived in Titan's methane lakes. But today she was focused on something much closer to home, or at least what humanity now called home. Mars had been terraformed for nearly 50 years, though calling it terraformed was generous. The atmosphere was breathable if you didn't mind a metallic taste, and the occasional dust storm that could strip paint from a hover car. The gravity was still only about 40% of Earth's, which made everything feel like a slow-motion dance. But it was home to nearly 2 million humans, and Sarah loved it. She was examining tissue samples from the indigenous Martian moss, one of the few native species that had actually benefited from terraforming, when her equipment started going crazy. The spectrometer readings were off the charts, showing energy signatures that shouldn't exist. The genetic sequencer was spitting out data that made no sense, as if the moss had suddenly developed structures that defied known biology. What the hell? Sarah muttered, adjusting the calibration for the third time. The readings didn't change. That's when the lab's emergency communication system crackled to life. Director Harrison's voice filled the room, tight with a tension Sarah had never heard before. All department heads to the main conference room immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah glanced at her readings one more time, then, reluctantly, left her samples behind. The hallways of the research station buzzed with nervous energy. Scientists, technicians, and support staff moved with purpose, their conversations hushed but urgent. Something big was happening. The conference room was packed when Sarah arrived. Director Harrison stood at the front, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed what appeared to be space, but not empty space. Ships, thousands of them, arranged in perfect geometric formations that hurt to look at directly. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. 12 minutes ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected this fleet emerging from what appears to be some form of faster-than-light travel. They are currently positioned at the edge of our solar system, approximately 4 billion kilometers from Sol. The room erupted in whispers. Sarah felt her stomach drop. First contact. It was really happening. The fleet consists of approximately 47,000 vessels of unknown design and composition. They appear to be holding position, but we've detected significant energy signatures consistent with advanced weaponry. Harrison paused, letting the implications sink in. Earth, Luna, Mars, and all outer colonies have been placed on maximum alert. Dr. Rodriguez from the physics department raised his hand. Have they attempted communication? Yes. Harrison's expression grew even more grim. 3 minutes after their arrival, we received this transmission. The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be a being that might have been beautiful if it weren't so clearly engineered for intimidation. Tall, graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer between silver and gold, it possessed 6 arms arranged symmetrically around a torso that was too long, too narrow. Its face was humanoid enough to be unsettling. 2 large, multifaceted eyes above a mouth that held too many teeth. When it spoke, the voice was melodious and terrible, like a symphony played on instruments made of bone and starlight. Mortals of the 3rd planet and its satellites, the being said, its words somehow reaching every human ear in their own native language. You have been judged. Your species has been found adequate for our purposes. You will surrender all independence immediately. Your worlds, your resources, your very lives now belong to the ethereal dominion. Resistance will result in consequences you cannot imagine. The recording ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. This message was broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited human settlement in the solar system. Harrison continued. Earth's response was direct. Another recording began to play. This one showed President Martinez standing in the Oval Office, her face set in lines of absolute determination. "To whoever you are," she said, addressing the camera, but clearly speaking to the aliens, "humanity has never bowed to tyrants, whether they came from Earth or the stars. We are not your property. We will never be your property. If you want war, you'll get war. But you should know, you've picked a fight with the wrong species." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The president had just declared war on beings who possessed technology that could move 47,000 ships across interstellar distances. "That transmission was sent 43 minutes ago," Harrison said. "The alien fleet has begun moving towards Sol. Current projections have them reaching Earth orbit in approximately 18 hours. Dr. Kim, from the engineering section, stood up. "What about our defenses? The orbital platforms, the lunar shipyards?" "Earth's combined military forces consist of approximately 8,000 ships of various classes," Harrison replied. "The colonies can contribute another 1,500. We are outnumbered 20-1 by a technologically superior enemy." The room fell silent again. Sarah stared at the tactical display, watching the alien fleet's slow but inexorable advance toward the inner solar system. Each of those dots represented a ship larger than anything humanity had ever built, powered by technologies they barely understood. However, Harrison continued, and Sarah caught a glimmer of something in his voice. Not hope, exactly, but determination. Humanity has never been particularly good at accepting impossible odds. Emergency protocols are now in effect. All research data is to be transmitted to Earth and the Deep Space Archives immediately. All non-essential personnel will be evacuated to the underground shelters within the next 6 hours. Sarah found herself thinking about the strange readings from the Martian moss. In the face of an alien invasion, it seemed ridiculously unimportant. But something about those energy signatures nagged at her. "Dr. Chun," Harrison called out, and Sarah realized she'd been lost in thought. "Your xenobiology expertise may be needed in the coming hours. Report to the communication center. We're trying to learn everything we can about these beings before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As the meeting broke up, Sarah lingered, staring at the holographic display. The alien, ethereal, they call themselves, had referred to humans as mortals. Not humans, not Terrans, not even a species designation. Mortals. As if death was humanity's defining characteristic. Sarah made her way to the communications center, her mind racing. The facility was a maze of equipment she barely understood, screens showing data streams from across the solar system. Intelligence reports, fleet movements, desperate diplomatic attempts that had so far gone unanswered. "Dr. Chun," a young technician approached her. "I'm Officer Park. Director Harrison said you might be able to help us understand the biological aspects of our visitors." "I can try," Sarah replied, though she felt out of her depth. "What do we know about them?" Park led her to a workstation where the alien transmission played on loop. "Not much. The beings in the recording appeared to be artificial or heavily modified. Notice the symmetrical arm arrangement. That's not naturally evolved. The bone structure suggests they were originally bipedal, but extensive modification has occurred." Sarah studied the image closely. Park was right. This wasn't natural evolution. The being's entire physiology screamed of genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, biological modification pushed to extremes. "They've remade themselves," she murmured. "But into what? That's what we're hoping you can tell us." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and Director Harrison's voice echoed over the intercom. "All stations, we have a priority alert from Earth Defense Command. The alien fleet has accelerated. Revised estimates put them in Earth orbit in 6 hours. All evacuation procedures are now in effect immediately. Sarah felt her knees go weak. 6 hours. Whatever was going to happen would happen in 6 hours. Dr. Chun, Park said urgently. There's something else. We've been monitoring communications from Earth. The military is planning something called Operation Defiance. It's classified beyond my clearance, but what? But they're asking for volunteers for one-way missions. The weight of those words settled on Sarah like a physical thing. Humanity was planning to go down fighting, even against impossible odds. It was stupid, suicidal, and completely predictable. I need to get back to my lab, Sarah said suddenly. Those readings I was getting from the moss samples, there was something wrong about the timing. Dr. Chun, evacuation procedures, can wait 30 minutes. Sarah was already moving toward the door. Something about those energy signatures, they started right before the alien fleet appeared. That can't be a coincidence. She ran through the corridors, her mind working furiously. The Martian moss had been stable for decades, showing no unusual properties. But this morning, it had suddenly begun exhibiting energy patterns that defied explanation. And now aliens were invading. The timing was too precise to be random. Her lab was in chaos when she arrived. The automated systems were backing up data and purging sensitive information, but her samples were still there, still showing those impossible readings. Sarah ignored the evacuation warnings and began running every test she could think of. The results made no sense. The moss was generating quantum resonance patterns, somehow tapping into zero-point energy fluctuations. It was as if the plant had become a biological antenna, tuned to frequencies that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. What are you listening for? Sarah whispered to the sample. That's when her equipment detected another transmission. Not from the alien fleet, from somewhere much farther away. The signal was faint, almost lost in cosmic background radiation, but it was there, and it was artificial. Sarah's hands flew over her instruments, trying to isolate and decode the transmission. What she found made her blood run cold. The signal wasn't coming from the direction of the ethereal fleet. It was coming from the opposite side of the galaxy, from a region of space that human deep space probes had designated as empty. But if the signal was accurate, there was something out there, something vast. The transmission itself was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but it contained more information than Sarah's instruments could fully process. What she could decode was terrifying. Star charts showing the positions of thousands of solar systems, tactical data that suggested massive fleet movements, and what appeared to be casualty reports listing species after species marked as pacified or eliminated. And at the bottom of the data stream, a simple message in what appeared to be the same language the ethereals had used. Mortals resist. Continue harvesting operations. Dominion will be absolute. Sarah realized she was looking at intelligence from an ongoing war, a war between the ethereals and someone else. Someone who called humans mortals, but didn't seem to consider them part of the Dominion. She was about to dive deeper into the data when her lab door burst open. Officer Park stood there, breathing heavily. Dr. Chun, you need to come now. The fleet, they've changed course. They're heading for Mars first. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What? Why would they? We don't know. But they'll be here in 2 hours. All evacuation shuttles are launching in 30 minutes. This is your last chance. Sarah looked at her samples, at the data streaming across her screens, at the transmission that suggested this invasion was just a small part of something much larger. Officer Park, you need to see this. The moss, these readings, I think they're connected to the invasion somehow. Park stepped into the lab, his eyes widening as he saw the energy signatures Sarah's instruments were detecting. What am I looking at? Biological quantum resonance. The moss is acting like some kind of organic communication device. And I intercepted a transmission. Park, I don't think the ethereals are the only players in this game. Before Park could respond, the building shook. Not from Martian seismic activity, from something much more immediate. Through the lab's small window, Sarah could see lights in the sky. Ships. Thousands of them. their hulls gleaming like liquid mercury against the rust-colored Martian atmosphere. "They're here," Park breathed. The ethereal fleet had arrived at Mars, and they were nothing like the tactical displays had suggested. Up close, their ships were impossibly beautiful and terrifying organic curves that suggested they had been grown rather than built. They moved with a grace that defied physics, forming complex patterns in the sky that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. As Sarah watched, smaller craft began detaching from the main fleet, heading for the planet's surface. Landing parties. The invasion of Mars had begun. "Dr. Chun," Park said urgently, "we have to go. Now." Sarah grabbed her data drives and the moss samples. Whatever was happening, she had a feeling these readings would be important. As they ran toward the evacuation shuttles, the building shook again, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her stumble. One of the ethereal ships was landing directly on the research station. Not near it, on it. The building was being consumed by some kind of organic growth, the alien hull material spreading like cancer across the human structures. They reached the shuttle bay just as the last transport was preparing to leave. The pilot, a grizzled veteran named Captain Morrison, waved them aboard. "Cutting it close, Doc," he said as they strapped in. "Reports from across the planet say the aliens aren't just landing. They're doing something to the infrastructure. Looks like they're converting it to match their technology." As the shuttle lifted off, Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched her lab disappear beneath writhing alien metal. But she also noticed something else. Wherever the ethereal ships touched down, the local plant life, including the moss, began glowing with that same energy signature she detected. "They're not just invading," she realized. "They're communicating with something. The moss, the plants, they're part of some kind of network." "What kind of network?" Park asked. Sarah thought about the transmission she'd intercepted, about the casualty reports from across the galaxy, about species after species being pacified or eliminated. A terrible possibility began to form in her mind. "A network that spans the galaxy," she said quietly. "They're not just conquering worlds, they're connecting them, turning them into nodes in some kind of biological communication system." Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. "All passengers, we're receiving a general transmission from Earth Defense Command. Patching it through now." The shuttle speakers filled with the voice of Admiral Harrison, the President's military advisor. "All human forces, all colonies, all citizens of the Terran Federation. The enemy has revealed their strategy. They're not simply invading our worlds. They are attempting to transform them. We have 43 minutes before their main fleet reaches Earth orbit. In that time, Operation Defiance will commence." Sarah felt her heart sink. Operation Defiance. The suicide mission Park had mentioned. Every available ship, from the largest dreadnought to the smallest fighter, will engage the enemy at maximum range. We know we cannot win through conventional tactics. We know the odds. But we also know who we are. We are humanity. We have never surrendered to tyrants, whether they ruled nations or galaxies. Today, we show the universe what mortals are capable of when they refuse to bow. The transmission ended, leaving the shuttle in silence. Through the window, Sarah could see the ethereal ships continuing their work on Mars, their organic technology spreading across the planet like an infection. But she could also see something else, human ships rising from hidden bases, converging on the alien fleet. The first shots of what would become known as the War for Soul were about to be fired. As their shuttle raced toward the outer system rendezvous point, Sarah clutched her moss samples and tried to process everything she'd learned. The ethereals weren't just invaders. They were harvesters, converting worlds into nodes in a galactic network. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed that humans would surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. They clearly didn't understand mortals very well. The battle for Mars began 3 minutes later. Sarah watched through the shuttle's rear cameras as human ships swarmed the ethereal fleet like angry wasps attacking giants. The aliens were larger, more advanced, more numerous. But the humans were desperate and desperate humans were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. The first human ship to die was the patrol craft Indomitable. It rammed an ethereal cruiser at full speed, its nuclear self-destruct turning both ships into a brief new star. The second was the destroyer Unflinching, which used its entire missile complement to cripple an alien carrier before being vaporized by return fire. But for every human ship that died, it took at least one ethereal vessel with it. And the humans kept coming. Jesus, Captain Morrison breathed over the intercom. They're actually doing it. They're making the bastards pay for every meter of space. Sarah watched the battle with a mixture of horror and pride. This was humanity at its most basic level, cornered, outgunned, facing extinction, and absolutely refusing to go quietly. It was beautiful and terrible and completely futile. The ethereal fleet was winning, but they were bleeding, and according to Sarah's readings, they were broadcasting everything back to their network. Every human tactic, every desperate gambit, every act of suicidal courage was being recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. She hoped whoever was on the receiving end was paying attention. Because if the ethereals thought this was humanity at its worst, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. The battle for Mars was just the beginning. Earth was next, and Earth had 40 years of military preparation, 30 billion angry humans, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The war for Sol had begun, and both sides were about to learn that mortals, when properly motivated, were capable of things that would make gods pause. Sarah clutched her samples tighter and watched the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, other species were watching too. Watching to see if the mortals of Sol would break like all the others, or if they would do something that had never been done before. Resist. The shuttle jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its refugees toward the outer colonies. Behind them, Mars burned as two alien technologies clashed in the space above it. And ahead of them, Earth waited, its defenders grimly preparing for the arrival of an enemy that had never known defeat. The ethereals had called humans mortals, as if death was their defining characteristic. They were about to learn that mortality, properly applied, could be the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, because beings that lived forever had something to lose. Mortals facing extinction had nothing left to fear. And fear, as the ethereals were about to discover, was the only advantage immortals had ever possessed. Now it was gone. The war had begun, and the mortals were done being afraid. Admiral Zhang Wei stood in the command center of the Terran Defiance, humanity's largest dreadnought, and watched as 47,000 enemy ships approached Earth. The tactical display showed them as red dots against the starfield, each one representing firepower that could glass a city. His own fleet consisted of 8,000 ships of various sizes, from massive carriers down to single-seat fighters whose pilots were barely old enough to vote. All battle groups in position, replied Commander Sarah Cross, his tactical officer. Luna Defense Grid is online. Orbital platforms have full weapon loads. Planetary shields are at maximum power. Zhang nodded. Earth's defenses were impressive by human standards. They had learned much from humanity's various wars, building layer upon layer of protection around their homeworld. Massive space stations bristled with rail guns and particle cannons. The moon itself had been turned into a fortress, its surface covered with missile silos and energy weapon emplacements. Even Earth's orbital space was filled with automated defense platforms and armed merchant vessels pressed into military service. It wouldn't be enough. Zhang knew it, his officers knew it, and the enemy certainly knew it. But that wasn't the point. "Sir," called Lieutenant Hayes from the communication station, "we're receiving a transmission from the ethereal fleet." "Put it through." The main screen filled with the image of an ethereal commander, its 6 arms moving in patterns that might have been gestures of contempt. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made human bones vibrate uncomfortably. "Mortal Fleet Commander," it said, somehow knowing exactly who Zhang was despite never having met humans before. You have witnessed the fate of your colony on the fourth planet. Your resistance was amusing, but ultimately futile. Surrender now, and your species will be granted the honor of serving the Dominion. Continue this foolishness, and you will join the thousands of species we have eliminated entirely. Zhang stepped forward, knowing that his response would be broadcast not just to the ethereal fleet, but to every human ship, every orbital platform, every civilian shelter on Earth, and throughout the solar system. Ethereal Commander, he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. My name is Admiral Zhang Wei of the Terran Federation Navy. I speak for all humanity when I say, go to hell. The ethereal's expression didn't change, but its skin shifted from gold to deep crimson. Your species' capacity for self-destruction continues to amaze us, mortal. Very well. You will serve as an example to others who might consider resistance. The transmission ended, and Zhang turned to his crew. Every human eye in the command center was on him, waiting for orders that would determine whether humanity lived or died in the next few hours. All ships, Zhang announced, his voice carrying to every vessel in the human fleet. This is Admiral Zhang. Today, we face an enemy that believes mortality makes us weak. They think that because we die, we have less value than them. They're about to learn why that's the biggest mistake any species can make. He paused, looking around the command center at faces that range from teenage to elderly, from career military to civilian volunteers. Mortals fight harder than immortals because we know our time is limited. We love deeper because we know love can end. We dream bigger because we know dreams may be all we have. And today we're going to show these ethereals what mortals do when someone threatens our home. The first wave of ethereal ships crossed into weapons range 18 minutes later. They moved with perfect formation, their organic hulls shifting and changing as they adapted to human tactics in real time. Their weapons were things of terrifying beauty, streams of coherent energy that seemed to bend space around them, missiles that pursued their targets like living creatures, and defensive fields that made their ships appear to shimmer like mirages. But the humans had advantages too. They were fighting in their home system, with intimate knowledge of every asteroid, every gravity well, every place where debris from past battles still drifted in useful patterns. More importantly, they were fighting for survival, and desperate humans had a long history of accomplishing impossible things. Open fire, Zhang ordered. The space around Earth erupted in light. Every human weapon fired at once. Railguns that launched projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, particle beams that could cut through ship hulls like paper, nuclear missiles with yields that could crack moons. The combined firepower of humanity's home defense force reached out across millions of kilometers and slammed into the approaching ethereal fleet. The results were devastating. The first wave of alien ships staggered under the onslaught. Their shields flared and failed, their perfect formations broke apart, and for the first time in recorded galactic history, an ethereal fleet took significant casualties in the opening moments of a battle. Direct hits on 17 enemy capital ships, reported Commander Cross, her voice tight with excitement. Multiple escort vessels destroyed or disabled. They're falling back to regroup. But Zhang wasn't celebrating yet. The ethereal's retreat was tactical, not panicked. Even as they pulled back, their ships were adapting, their organic hulls reconfiguring to better resist human weapons. When they came again, they would be ready. All units, prepare for second wave, Zhang commanded. And remember, make every shot count. They won't fall for the same trick twice. He was right. When the ethereals attacked again, they came in dispersed formations that made concentrated fire difficult. Their hulls had adapted to resist railgun impacts and particle beam penetration. Worse, they had learned to predict human tactical patterns and were countering them with frightening efficiency. The battle quickly devolved into a vicious slugging match. Human ships died in brilliant explosions as ethereal energy weapons found their marks. But Each one took at least one enemy vessel with it. The destroyer Courage rammed an ethereal cruiser after its weapons failed, both ships disappearing in a ball of plasma. The carrier hopes and launched every fighter it had before being torn apart by alien missiles, its pilots screaming defiance as they dove into the enemy formation. But for every human ship that died, 10 more seemed to take its place. Zhang watched in amazement as civilian vessels joined the battle. Cargo haulers with mining lasers, luxury yachts with improvised missile racks, even tourist ships whose crews had somehow managed to mount railguns on their observation decks. "Admiral," Commander Cross called out, "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the ethereal command ship. They're preparing something big." Zhang studied the tactical display. The enemy flagship was 3 times larger than any human vessel, a thing of organic curves and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Energy was building along its hull in patterns that suggested a weapon beyond human understanding. "All ships," Zhang broadcast, "take evasive action. Maximum scatter pattern." The human fleet spread out just as the ethereal flagship fired. What emerged from its weapon ports wasn't a beam or missile, but something that looked like a crack in reality itself. A line of absolute darkness that severed space-time along its path. The crack swept through where the human fleet had been concentrated seconds before, and everything it touched simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, erased from reality as if it had never been. The weapon cut through 12 human ships, a small asteroid, and part of an orbital platform before finally dissipating. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered on the command channel. Zhang felt his heart sink. If the ethereals had weapons that could literally delete matter from existence, humanity's conventional tactics were doomed. But then his sensors detected something unexpected. "Admiral," Cross reported, her voice puzzled. "The enemy flagship is showing signs of massive power drain. It looks like that weapon took everything they had." Zhang's mind raced. A reality-cutting weapon that could only be fired once per ship. It was devastating, but it had limitations. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was exploiting enemy limitations. "All ships, converge on the flagship while it's recharging," Zhang ordered. "Everything we have right now." The human fleet, bloodied but unbroken, turned toward the ethereal command ship like a pack of wolves sensing wounded prey. The flagship's escorts moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered now. Human ships dove through alien defensive fire, accepting casualties to get close enough for point-blank attacks. The cruiser Relentless made it to within 1,000 meters of the flagship before being blown apart, but not before launching every nuclear warhead it carried. The destroyer Last Stand managed to fire its main guns directly into the alien ship's hull before being vaporized by return fire. Fighter after fighter dove kamikaze attacks into the enemy vessel's weapon ports and sensor arrays. And slowly, impossibly, the massive ethereal flagship began to list. Its organic hull was scarred and burning, its perfect symmetry broken by human weapons and human courage. For the first time in the battle, Zhang allowed himself a moment of hope. That's when the rest of the ethereal fleet arrived. Zhang watched in horror as 20,000 fresh enemy ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel just outside Earth's orbit. These weren't the advanced force they'd been fighting. This was the main fleet, and every ship was larger and more advanced than anything they'd faced so far. "Admiral," Cross said quietly, "total enemy count now at 67,000 ships. Estimated human losses so far." "I don't want to hear numbers," Zhang interrupted. "I want to hear options." But there weren't any options left. Humanity had fought brilliantly, had made the ethereals pay a price they'd never expected, had proven that mortals could stand against immortal tyrants. But mathematics was mathematics, and no amount of courage could overcome odds this overwhelming. That's when Lieutenant Hayes looked up from his communication station with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Admiral," he said slowly, "I'm receiving multiple faster-than-light communications. Not from the ethereal fleet. From somewhere else." What kind of communications? Battle coordination signals. Fleet movement orders. Tactical assessments. Hayes paused, double-checking his readings. Sir, someone else is out there. Someone with a military force. And they're heading this way. Zhang felt his heart begin to race again. Can you decode the transmissions? Partially, sir. The technology is advanced, but not incompatible with our systems. But, Admiral, Hayes looked up with an expression of complete disbelief. The fleet movement orders are referencing thousands of ships. Hundreds of thousands. Before Zhang could respond, space itself seemed to tear open just beyond Pluto's orbit. Dozens of rifts in reality appeared simultaneously, and through them poured ships. Not ethereal vessels with their organic curves and living hulls, but stark, angular craft that looked like they had been forged from starlight and mathematics. The newcomers' ships were beautiful in a completely different way from the ethereals. Clean lines, perfect symmetries, hulls that seemed to be made from crystalline materials that refracted light in impossible spectra. And there were thousands of them, with more arriving every second. Admiral, Hayes called out, his voice cracking with excitement. We're receiving a transmission from the new fleet. It's in perfect English. Zhang stepped forward as the main screen filled with an image that made him question everything he thought he knew about the universe. The being addressing them was humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal and eyes that held depths like distant galaxies. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonies that suggested vast intelligence and terrible purpose. Humans of soul, the being said, and Zhang could hear sadness and determination in equal measure. We are the transcendent collective. We have traveled many light years to reach you, drawn by reports of your resistance to the ethereal dominion. We offer alliance in the war against those who would harvest the galaxy. Zhang found his voice. Who are you? What do you want? The crystalline being's expression shifted to what might have been admiration. We are those who escaped. Long ago, we too faced the choice between surrender and extinction. We chose to transcend our physical forms, to become something the ethereals could not harvest or control. For millennia, we have fought them across the galaxy, always arriving too late to save species like yours. But this time another voice joined the first, and the screen split to show a second being, this one appearing to be made of living energy. This time we were watching. We saw your species choose to fight rather than surrender. We saw mortals face immortals and refuse to bow. In 3 billion years of warfare, no species has ever made the Dominion bleed as you have in the last 6 hours. Zhang looked around the command center at his crew, seeing his own amazement reflected in their faces. You're saying this is part of a larger war? The largest war, the crystal being confirmed. The ethereals have conquered 7,000 systems, harvested 600 species, turned entire sectors of the galaxy into nodes in their Dominion network. Always, the conquered species surrender when faced with impossible odds. Always, they choose slavery over death. Except you, the energy being added. Mortals who fight like immortals, who die like heroes, who turn their brief lives into weapons against eternal tyranny. You are what we have searched the galaxy to find, a species that cannot be broken. Zhang felt a chill of understanding. You want us to help you fight them? No, the crystal being said, and its voice carried certainties that spanned eons. We want to help you fight them. This is your war now, humans of soul. The ethereals made it so when they chose to harvest your worlds. But you will not fight alone. The tactical display updated as the transcendent fleet took positions around the solar system. Zhang stared at the readouts in disbelief. The newcomers weren't just numerous. Their ships were individually more powerful than entire human fleets. Energy readings that made the ethereal flagship's reality weapon look like a firecracker. Admiral Zhang, the energy being said, and Zhang realized it knew his name, his rank, possibly his entire service record. Your species has proven something we thought impossible, that mortality can triumph over immortality through sheer force of will. Will you accept our alliance? Will you help us teach the galaxy that freedom is worth dying for? Zhang looked around the command center one more time, then at the tactical display showing the massive ethereal fleet that had come to enslave humanity. He thought about the pilots who had died ramming enemy ships, the civilians who had joined the fight with mining equipment, and tourist vessels, the simple fact that a species had looked at impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. On behalf of humanity, he said formally, I accept your alliance. Now let's show these ethereals what happens when you mess with mortals. The combined human transcendent fleet turned toward the ethereal formation, and space itself seemed to hold its breath. On one side, the servants of an immortal empire that had conquered most of the galaxy through fear and superior firepower. On the other, an alliance between beings who had transcended mortality and mortals who had learned to make their brief lives count for something. The battle for Earth was about to begin in earnest, but Zhang suspected that when it was over, it wouldn't be called the battle for Earth at all. It would be called the day the galaxy learned that some things were worth dying for, and that mortals, when properly motivated, were the most dangerous creatures in existence. The ethereals were about to receive an education in the difference between living forever and having something worth dying for. And humanity, backed by allies who had been waiting eons for someone like them to appear, was going to be their teacher. Class was now in session. The war for the galaxy had begun, and the mortals intended to graduate with honors. Zhang smiled grimly as he watched the enemy fleet adjust to face their new reality. The ethereals had made a simple mistake. They had assumed that mortality was a weakness. They were about to learn that it was humanity's greatest strength. After all, what did immortals know about making every moment count? The answer, as they were about to discover, was nothing at all, and that ignorance was going to cost them everything. The battle for Earth began with silence. For exactly 17 seconds, the three fleets faced each other in the space around humanity's homeworld. 67,000 ethereal ships arranged in perfect geometric formations, 8,000 human vessels scattered in defensive positions around Earth and Luna, and 15,000 transcendent craft that seemed to bend light around themselves as they took position. Captain Maria Santos of the destroyer Indefatigable used those 17 seconds to say a prayer she'd learned from her grandmother, check her weapons one final time, and look at the photo of her daughter taped to her command console. Around her, the bridge crew moved with quiet efficiency, each knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity remained free or became another footnote in the ethereal Dominion's catalog of conquered species. The silence ended when the ethereal flagship fired its reality-rending weapon directly at Earth itself. The line of absolute darkness that emerged from the massive vessel cut through space like a crack in a universe, aimed at the planet's northern hemisphere, where 3 billion humans lived and worked and dreamed. For a moment, it seemed as if the cradle of humanity would simply cease to exist. Then the transcendent ship Eternal Axiom moved. The crystalline vessel, easily the size of a small moon, positioned itself directly in the path of the reality weapon. The crack in space-time struck its hull and simply stopped. The ship's crystalline structure absorbed the weapon's energy, converted it, and reflected it back as a beam of pure mathematical harmony that turned 6 ethereal escort ships into geometric equations that solved themselves out of existence. All human ships, Admiral Zhang's voice crackled over the communication channels. You have just witnessed why we're fighting alongside the best allies in the galaxy. Time to show them what mortals can do. All units, attack pattern Delta 7. Make every shot count. Captain Santos grinned despite the impossible odds. Delta 7 was a human tactical formation that emphasized individual initiative over coordinated movement, perfect for a species that had learned warfare through millennia of chaotic conflicts. Where other civilizations might have developed rigid battle doctrines, humans had learned to be unpredictable. You heard the Admiral, Santos called to her crew. Let's show these immortal bastards what creativity looks like. Helm, take us into that gap between the third and fourth battle groups. Weapons, target their communication arrays. Let's see how well they coordinate when they can't talk to each other. The indefatigable dove into the ethereal formation like a shark among dolphins. Santos had commanded destroyers for 12 years, and she'd learned that the key to fighting larger ships was to be where they didn't expect you to be, doing things they couldn't predict. The ethereals might have superior technology, but they clearly relied on perfect coordination and logical tactical progression. Humans, Santos had learned long ago, were neither coordinated nor logical when their backs were against the wall. The Indefatigable's rail guns opened fire at point-blank range, sending depleted uranium slugs through the hull of an ethereal cruiser that had been designed to withstand energy weapons, but not kinetic impacts. The alien ship's organic hull rippled and began to regenerate, but not before Santos's missile salvo found the breach and detonated inside the vessel's core systems. "Direct hit," called her weapons officer. "Target is venting atmosphere and falling out of formation." "Good," Santos replied, already scanning for the next target. "Now let's—" Her words were cut off as the Indefatigable shook under the impact of ethereal return fire. The aliens had adapted faster than expected, their weapons already recalibrated to track human attack patterns. Santos felt her ship's armor buckle and watched warning lights cascade across her tactical display. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported her damage control officer. "Structural integrity at 60%. Santos was about to order evasive maneuvers when space around her exploded in prismatic light. The transcendent ship Wisdom of Eons had arrived alongside her destroyer, its crystalline weapons converting the nearby ethereal ships into abstract art pieces that existed for beautiful moments before dissolving into component atoms. A voice spoke directly into Santos's mind, telepathic communication that carried overtones of ancient sadness and infinite determination. "Captain Santos of the vessel Indefatigable, we are honored to fight alongside your species. Your tactical creativity exceeds our projections. Honored to have you watching our backs," Santos replied aloud, knowing the transcendent being would understand. "Any advice for fighting these bastards?" "Yes." The mental voice carried what might have been amusement. "Continue being human. The ethereals have never faced a species that treats warfare as improvisational art. Their adaptation algorithms cannot predict actions that lack mathematical basis." Santos understood immediately. The ethereals were trying to counter human tactics by analyzing patterns and developing responses. But human tactics, especially in desperate situations, often defied logical analysis. They were based on intuition, creativity, desperation, and sheer bloody-mindedness. "All ships in Task Force 7, Santos broadcast on the tactical network, new standing orders. Stop trying to make sense. Tactical doctrine is now officially whatever seems like it might work. Let's be unpredictable." The response was immediate and beautiful. Human ships throughout the battle began acting with inspired madness. The cruiser Dauntless used its tractor beams to grab an asteroid and throw it at an ethereal formation. The destroyer Relentless fired all its missiles straight up, then detonated them simultaneously to create a debris field that confused enemy sensors. Fighter squadrons began using maneuvers that violated basic principles of space combat, but somehow worked anyway. The ethereals, for the first time in their recorded military history, began to look confused. "Captain," Santos's communications officer called out, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from the surface. It's Dr. Sarah Chun from the Mars Research Station. Apparently she made it to Earth aboard a refugee transport. Put her through." Dr. Chen's voice filled the bridge, tight with excitement and exhaustion. "Captain Santos, I need to speak with Admiral Zhang immediately. I've discovered something about the ethereal network, something that might change everything." "Admiral Zhang is kind of busy right now, Doc," Santos replied, watching as 3 human squadrons executed a pincer movement that somehow involved flying through the gravity well of Earth's moon. Can you give me the short version? The ethereals aren't just conquering species, Chun said rapidly. They're converting them into biological communication nodes. Every world they've taken becomes part of a galaxy-spanning network. But, Captain, I intercepted transmissions during the Mars attack. This isn't just about conquest. It's about survival. Santos felt ice form in her stomach. Survival? What do you mean? The ethereals are running from something, Captain. Something they call the final silence. According to the transmissions I decoded, entire sectors of the galaxy have gone dark. Not destroyed, just silent. Empty. And whatever's causing it is spreading toward the core worlds. Before Santos could respond, the tactical situation around her ship exploded into chaos. The ethereal fleet had apparently decided that human unpredictability was too dangerous to tolerate. Their formations shifted into what could only be described as a full-scale berserker attack, abandoning their elegant tactical doctrines in favor of overwhelming firepower. All ships, Admiral Zhang's voice cut through the battle chatter. The enemy has changed tactics. They're going for maximum damage. All units fall back to defensive positions around Earth. But Santos was looking at her tactical display and seeing something different. The ethereal's formation change wasn't just about overwhelming firepower. It was about speed. They were trying to end the battle quickly, before something else could happen. Dr. Chun, Santos called out. How fast is this final silence spreading? Based on the transmission data, approximately one sector every few months. Captain, I think the ethereals are trying to harvest as many species as possible before whatever's causing the silence reaches them. Santos felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The ethereals' desperate attack, their willingness to take massive casualties, their obvious fear when the Transcendent Fleet arrived. They weren't just conquest-hungry immortals. They were refugees, trying to build a network large enough to resist something that scared beings powerful enough to conquer most of the galaxy. Captain, her weapons officer called out, enemy flagship is powering up that reality weapon again. Target appears to be the Transcendent Command ship. Santos watched as the ethereal flagship prepared to fire its most devastating weapon. If they destroyed the Transcendent Command vessel, the alien alliance would likely collapse, leaving humanity to face 60,000 enemy ships alone. It was a logical tactical move, exactly the kind of thinking that had let the ethereals conquer most of the known galaxy. It was also exactly the kind of thinking that humans specialized in disrupting. Helm, Santos ordered, plot an intercept course for the enemy flagship. Maximum acceleration. Ma'am, her helmsman asked, confusion clear in his voice. That ship is 20 times our mass and has weapons that can erase us from reality. Exactly, Santos replied, feeling the same grim satisfaction her ancestors must have felt when they decided to charge machine gun nests with nothing but bayonets. They'll never expect a destroyer to attack a flagship directly. Dr. Chun, patch me through to Admiral Zhang on priority override. Zhang's face appeared on the main screen, his bridge clearly taking heavy damage around him. Captain Santos, what's your status? About to do something really stupid, sir. But first, you need to hear what Dr. Chun discovered. The ethereals aren't just conquerors, they're refugees. They're running from something called the final silence, and they're trying to harvest species fast enough to build a network that can resist it. Zhang's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to grim determination. Are you saying they're not the real threat? I'm saying they're scared, sir. And scared beings make mistakes. I'm going to exploit one of those mistakes right now. Indefatigable out. Santos cut the transmission and turned to her crew. Every face on the bridge was looking at her with a mixture of trust and terror that defined human military service. They knew what she was planning, knew the odds, and knew they were probably about to die. They also knew it was the right thing to do. All stations, prepare for close engagement, Santos ordered. Weapons, I want every missile we have armed and ready. Engineering, give me everything the engines can handle without exploding. Communications, send a message to the Transcendent Fleet. Thanks for the backup. Watch this. The Indefatigable accelerated toward the ethereal flagship, its crew knowing they were flying into certain death, but also knowing that their sacrifice might save Earth. It was, Santos reflected, the most human thing imaginable, turning mortality into a weapon against immortality. The ethereal flagship's reality weapon fired, just as Santos had calculated it would. The crack in space-time shot toward the Transcendent Command ship, carrying enough power to erase a small moon from existence. But the weapon's path took it directly through the space where the Indefatigable was flying. For a moment, Santos thought she had miscalculated. The reality weapon would hit her ship and erase it from existence, accomplishing nothing except a particularly dramatic suicide. Then, she remembered Dr. Chen's words about the ethereals being scared, and she smiled. Scared beings didn't just use their most powerful weapons. They used them first, without thinking through all the implications. The reality crack struck the Indefatigable and, as expected, began to erase the ship from existence. But Santos had gambled on something the ethereals hadn't considered. What happened when a reality weapon encountered human engineering? Human technology was crude compared to ethereal biotechnology, but it had one significant advantage. It was completely unpredictable. The destroyer's nuclear reactor, designed with dozens of safety systems that could fail in dozens of different ways, encountered a reality-altering weapon and responded by doing something that violated several laws of physics. Instead of simply being erased, the Indefatigable exploded in a cascade of exotic particles that turned the reality weapon back on itself. The crack in space-time collapsed, rebounded, and shot back toward the ethereal flagship at twice its original velocity. The massive alien ship, its entire defense grid designed to protect against conventional weapons, had no defense against its own reality-warping technology. The weapon struck the flagship's hull and began erasing the ship that had created it. "Holy shit," Santos whispered as she watched the enemy flagship delete itself from existence. Around her, the Indefatigable's bridge was coming apart as reality reasserted itself in very confused ways. But her crew was cheering. The destruction of their flagship sent shock waves through the ethereal fleet. For beings accustomed to tactical perfection, watching their most powerful ship destroy itself through contact with primitive human technology was devastating. Their perfect formations wavered, their coordination faltered, and, for the first time in millennia, ethereal ships began to retreat without orders. All human and transcendent forces, Admiral Zhang's voice filled the communication channels. The enemy is in disarray. All units advance. Show them what happens when immortals fight mortals who have nothing left to lose. The combined human transcendent fleet surged forward, and what followed could barely be called a battle. It was more like a demonstration of what happened when rigid tactical doctrine met human improvisation backed by transcendent technology. The ethereal fleet, designed to fight predictable enemies using logical tactics, simply couldn't adapt to the combined assault of beings who treated physics as a suggestion and mortals who treated death as a tactical option. Within 3 hours, the surviving ethereal ships were fleeing the solar system, their perfect formations broken, their confidence shattered. They left behind a wreckage of 20,000 vessels, and the first military defeat their species had suffered in recorded history. But Captain Santos, floating in the wreckage of her ship while rescue vessels approached, was thinking about Dr. Chen's discovery. The ethereals weren't the real enemy. They were just the first refugees from something much worse. And if humanity was going to survive what was coming, they would need allies who understood that mortality, properly applied, was the strongest force in the universe. The war for Sol was over. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. And the mortals, backed by transcendent allies and armed with the knowledge that death was just another weapon in their arsenal, intended to teach the universe a lesson about what happened when you threatened someone's home. The ethereals had learned that lesson the hard way. Whatever was causing the final silence was about to get the same education. Class was still in session, and The mortals were just getting started 6 months after the battle for Earth. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the bridge of the Transcendent Dawn, the first human-built ship to incorporate both transcendent crystal technology and traditional human engineering. The result was something that looked like a crystalline cathedral that had been equipped with railguns and powered by controlled fury. The ship was part of the combined human transcendent exploration fleet that was currently investigating the edge of what the ethereals called the final silence. What they had found was worse than anyone had imagined. Dr. Chun called Captain Rodriguez from the tactical station. We're approaching the Kepler 442 system. According to ethereal records, this should have been home to the Valdori species, approximately 8 billion individuals with a Type 2 civilization. Sarah nodded, checking her instruments. The Valdori had been one of the ethereal's most recent conquests, absorbed into the Dominion network only 3 years ago. If the pattern held true, they would find a converted world covered in organic communication towers and populated by beings whose individuality had been subsumed into the collective consciousness. Instead, they found nothing. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Park from the sensor station, his voice tight with confusion, "I'm reading 0 life signs in the entire system. No ethereal installations, no communication networks, no evidence of conversion." But what, Lieutenant?" "Sir, I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Something has been systematically dismantling the planets, not destroying them, taking them apart piece by piece." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Through the viewport, the Kepler 442 system stretched before them like a graveyard. What should have been 8 planets orbiting a stable star was instead a debris field of precise geometric shapes, each piece exactly the same size and arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Kethvar," Sarah called to the transcendent being who served as the ship's science officer. "Are you detecting this?" The crystalline entity's form shifted through several configurations before settling on something vaguely humanoid. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics of deep concern. "Yes, Dr. Chun. This matches known stellar engineering techniques. The precision required to dismantle an entire solar system while maintaining mathematical perfection suggests technology beyond even our capabilities." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Could the ethereals have done this?" "Negative," Kitvar replied. "Ethereal conversion techniques preserve planetary structures while modifying biological systems. This level of systematic deconstruction implies a completely different purpose." Sarah was studying the sensor readings when her equipment detected something that made her blood run cold. "Captain, I'm picking up a signal. Very faint, very distant. It's an ethereal distress call." "From where?" "The next system over. Gliese 667C. Sarah's hands flew over her controls, trying to isolate the transmission. "Captain, according to this signal, there's a surviving ethereal fleet in that system, and they're under attack." Rodriguez looked around the bridge at his mixed human and transcendent crew. The logical course of action was to avoid the system entirely. The ethereals were still technically enemies, and whatever force had dismantled Kepler 442 was clearly beyond current tactical understanding. But humans, Rodriguez had learned, rarely chose the logical course when sentient beings were in danger. "Set course for Gliese 667C, he ordered. "Maximum acceleration. And send a message to Admiral Zhang. Tell him we may have found what the ethereals are running from." The journey to Gliese 667C took 8 hours at maximum faster-than-light speed. During the trip, Sarah worked with Kethvar to analyze the geometric patterns they'd found in the debris field. What they discovered was disturbing on multiple levels. "The mathematics are perfect," Kethvar reported, its crystalline form flickering through complex configurations as it processed data. Each planetary fragment has been reduced to identical cubic units, measuring exactly 1.618 kilometers on each side. The spacing between units follows the golden ratio. The arrangement follows principles of geometric optimization that approach divine perfection. "Divine perfection?" Sarah asked. "That's not a term I've heard you use before." Because it is not a concept that should exist in this universe, HFY replied, its voice carrying overtones of something that might have been fear. The level of precision required suggests beings who have transcended not just mortality, but the physical laws that govern matter and energy. We are dealing with entities that have achieved mathematical godhood. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Entities? Plural. The pattern suggests multiple consciousnesses working in perfect coordination, perhaps millions of them, each one capable of restructuring matter at the subatomic level. Before Sarah could respond, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Gliese 667C system. What they saw there defied every military doctrine either species had ever developed. The ethereal fleet, or what remained of it, was arranged in a desperate defensive sphere around the system's third planet. Their organic ships were scorched and broken, clearly having sustained massive damage. But what they were fighting was worse than anything Sarah could have imagined. The attackers appeared to be geometric shapes, perfect spheres, cubes, and dodecahedrons that moved through space with mathematical precision. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were mobile expressions of mathematical concepts given physical form, and they were systematically dismantling everything they encountered. "Captain," Lieutenant Park called out, his voice breaking slightly, "I'm reading approximately 10,000 ethereal ships in defensive formation. They're being engaged by approximately 50 geometric entities. And, Captain, the entities are winning." Rodriguez stared at the tactical display. 50 mathematical shapes were defeating 10,000 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. The implications were staggering. "Dr. Chun," he said grimly, "I think we found your final silence." As they watched, one of the geometric entities, a perfect icosahedron about the size of a small moon, approached an ethereal battle group. The alien ships fired everything they had, energy weapons, and reality-warping devices that should have been capable of destroying anything. The weapons struck the mathematical shape and simply ceased. Not absorbed, not deflected. The attacks were converted into pure mathematics and solved out of existence. The icosahedron then did something that violated every law of physics Sarah understood. It expanded across multiple dimensions simultaneously, somehow occupying the same space as the ethereal ships while existing in a completely different geometric framework. When it contracted back to normal space, the alien vessels were gone, converted into the same geometric shapes they'd seen in the previous system. They're not destroying the ethereals, Sarah realized with growing horror. They're converting them, turning living beings into mathematical perfection. "All stations," Captain Rodriguez called out. "We are dealing with a threat beyond current understanding. Send a priority message to Earth and the transcendent homeworld. Tell them we've found the source of the final silence, and it's not something any military force can fight." "Captain," called the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the ethereal fleet. They're requesting immediate assistance." Rodriguez looked around his bridge. Helping the ethereals meant engaging entities that could convert matter into mathematics with casual ease. It was suicide. It was also the right thing to do. "Open a channel," Rodriguez ordered. The main screen filled with the image of an ethereal commander, its 6 arms moving in patterns of desperate supplication. When it spoke, its voice carried none of the previous arrogance, only fear and the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting an unwinnable war. "Human vessel," the ethereal said, its melodious voice cracking with strain, we apologize for our previous hostility. We understand now that your species represents something we had lost, the ability to fight against impossible odds. Will you help us?" Rodriguez looked at Sarah, at HFY, at his human and transcendent crew. Every face reflected the same grim understanding. They were about to enter a battle they couldn't win against an enemy they didn't understand to save beings who had tried to enslave them. It was, Rodriguez reflected, the most human decision possible. "Ethereal Commander," Rodriguez replied. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Terran Federation Navy. My species has a saying, nobody fights alone. Consider this our formal introduction to your species done right." The tactical situation that followed could barely be called a battle. It was more like a demonstration of what happened when biological entities try to fight living mathematics. The geometric shapes moved through space according to principles that made conventional tactics meaningless, converting everything they touched into perfect mathematical expressions. But humans, Rodriguez had learned, specialized in making the meaningless meaningful. All ships, he broadcast to the combined ethereal human transcendent force. Conventional tactics are useless against these entities. We need to be unpredictable, irrational, chaotic. Make decisions that don't make mathematical sense. The response was immediate. Human ships began executing maneuvers that violated basic principles of physics. Not because they could, but because they tried anyway, and sometimes reality bent far enough to let them succeed. Transcendent vessels added their own impossibilities, using crystalline technology to create effects that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most importantly, they started doing things that couldn't be reduced to mathematical formulas. Sarah watched from the bridge as the destroyer probability fired all its weapons in random directions, creating a pattern of destruction that followed no logical framework. A geometric entity approached to convert the chaos into order and found a human-generated chaos couldn't be mathematically defined. The entity paused, the first time anyone had seen one of the mathematical beings hesitate. "It's working," Sarah breathed. "They can't convert what they can't understand mathematically." "All ships," Rodriguez called out, "maintain chaotic operations. Do things that make no sense. Be human." The battle became a surreal dance between order and chaos, mathematical perfection and biological unpredictability. The geometric entities, for the first time in their existence, encountered forces they couldn't solve, patterns they couldn't perfect, beings whose very existence defied mathematical categorization. Slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. But Sarah was looking at the long-term sensor readings and realizing something terrible. "Captain," she called out, "the geometric patterns we found in Kepler 442, they're not random. They're preparation. Preparation for what? For construction. These entities aren't just converting matter into mathematical perfection. They're building something. Something that requires the mass of entire solar systems." Rodriguez felt his blood turn to ice. Building what? Sarah's instruments gave her the answer, and she wished they hadn't. "A structure, Captain. Something vast beyond comprehension. Based on the rate of conversion and the geometric patterns, they're constructing what appears to be a physical manifestation of pure mathematics. A three-dimensional equation that, when complete, will encompass the entire galaxy. What happens when it's finished? I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "But based on the mathematical principles involved, I think it will convert everything, every star, every planet, every living being, into part of the equation. Perfect mathematical order imposed on a chaotic biological universe." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display, where humans, transcendents, and ethereals were fighting side by side against an enemy that wanted to turn the entire galaxy into a math problem. The combined fleet was holding its own, but barely, and more geometric entities were arriving every hour. "How long do we have?" Sarah ran the calculations twice to be sure. At the current rate of conversion, approximately 18 months before they reach critical mass. After that, the mathematical cascade will be unstoppable. Rodriguez nodded grimly. 18 months to save the galaxy from beings that had transcended physics itself. It should have been impossible. But humans, he had learned, specialized in making the impossible merely unlikely. "Send a message to Admiral Zhang," Rodriguez ordered. "Tell him we need every ship, every weapon, every crazy idea humanity has ever had. We're going to war against mathematics itself." "Sir," the communications officer called out, "the ethereal commander is requesting permission to speak with you directly." "Put him through." The ethereal appeared on screen, its alien features showing emotions Rodriguez was learning to recognize: respect, gratitude, and determination. Captain Rodriguez, the being said formally, on behalf of the ethereal dominion, I offer our full alliance in this war. Our technologies, our knowledge, our lives, all are at your disposal. We have spent millennia conquering the galaxy in preparation for this threat. We were wrong about many things, but we were right about one. This enemy cannot be fought alone. Rodriguez nodded. Alliance accepted. Now, let's go save the universe. The retreat from Gliese 667C was orderly, but desperate. The combined fleet had learned valuable lessons about fighting mathematical entities, but they had also learned how outmatched they truly were. As they jumped to faster-than-light speed, Sarah watched the geometric shapes resume their systematic conversion of a system. 18 months to save the galaxy. It should have been impossible. But then, humans had always been good at proving that impossible was just another word for challenging. The war for reality was about to begin, and the mortals intended to show the universe that chaos, properly applied, was stronger than any equation. After all, what did perfect mathematics know about being beautifully, chaotically, impossibly alive? The answer, as the entities were about to learn, was absolutely nothing. And that ignorance was going to be their downfall 18 months later. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the command center of Hope's Defiance, a massive space station constructed in the asteroid belt from the combined technologies of humanity, the Transcendent Collective, and the Ethereal Dominion. Around her, beings that had been mortal enemies 2 years ago worked side by side, preparing for what every military analyst agreed was an unwinnable war. The statistics were staggering. The geometric entities, now calling themselves the Axiom, had converted 47 star systems into their mathematical construct. Billions of beings had been transformed from chaotic biological life into perfect mathematical expressions. Entire civilizations had been reduced to elegant equations that existed in geometric harmony, and they were accelerating. Dr. Chun called Commander Torres from the tactical station. Latest reports from the monitoring stations show the Axiom have begun Phase 7 conversion protocols. They're targeting the core systems now. Sarah nodded grimly. Phase 7 meant the entity had reached critical mass. Soon, they would begin the final conversion, turning the entire galaxy into a single, perfect mathematical expression. Every star would become a number. Every planet would become a geometric constant. Every living being would become part of an equation so vast and complex that it would exist as pure thought made manifest. "How long do we have?" asked High Commander Veltar of the Ethereal Fleet, his 6 arms moving in patterns that Sarah had learned indicated deep concern. 67 hours, Sarah replied. After that, the mathematical cascade becomes self-sustaining. The Axiom won't need to actively convert systems anymore. Reality itself will begin conforming to their equation. Admiral Zhang Wei, now commanding the combined human transcendent ethereal fleet, studied the tactical displays with the expression of someone who had spent decades learning to fight impossible odds. Status of Operation Chaos Theory. All systems are prepared, replied Kethvar, the Transcendent Science Officer whose crystalline form had been modified with human mathematical randomness generators. Every ship in the combined fleet has been equipped with quantum uncertainty amplifiers. Every weapon system has been calibrated to produce mathematically irrational results. Every tactical computer has been infected with human logic protocols. Sarah couldn't help but smile despite the circumstances. Operation Chaos Theory was humanity's contribution to galactic warfare, the systematic weaponization of unpredictability. If the Axiom could only convert what they could mathematically understand, then the Allied forces would simply stop making mathematical sense. Dr. Chun called Lieutenant Parr from the communication station. We're receiving the final reports from the deep space reconnaissance missions. Sarah's smile faded as she reviewed the data. The reconnaissance fleets had been sent to observe the Axiom's largest construction projects, trying to understand what the entities were ultimately building. The The results were worse than anyone had feared. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, "the Axiom aren't just converting the galaxy into a mathematical construct. They're turning it into a conscious mind, a galaxy-spanning intelligence of pure mathematical thought." The command center fell silent. Even the ethereals, who had spent millennia conquering other species, looked shaken by the implications. "You're saying they're trying to turn the entire galaxy into a single thinking entity?" Admiral Zhang asked. "Not trying. Succeeding." Sarah displayed the reconnaissance data on the main screen. The image showed a three-dimensional model of the galactic spiral, but instead of stars and planets, it displayed mathematical relationships, logical connections, neural pathways made of converted solar systems. Every star they convert becomes a neuron. Every planetary system becomes a synaptic connection. When the process is complete, the galaxy itself will achieve consciousness. "And then what?" asked Veltar. Sarah consulted her calculations one more time, hoping she had made an error. She hadn't. "Then it begins converting other galaxies. The mathematical mind they're creating will be capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics across the entire observable universe. Perfect order imposed on cosmic chaos." Admiral Zhang was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke with the calm determination that had made him humanity's greatest military leader. "Then, we stop them before they finish." "Admiral," Kethvar interjected, its crystalline form flickering through configurations of deep concern. "Our combined forces total approximately 43,000 ships. The Axiom entities now number in the millions, each one capable of converting entire fleets into mathematical expressions. The odds against success are literally incalculable." Zhang smiled with the expression that had terrified enemies across 3-star systems. "Incalculable? Good. That means they can't solve for a victory probability either." The final battle began in the Sagittarius Arm, where the Axiom had begun construction of.